PC Amateur Guy here. In today's video, I would like to talk about how to get rid of that noise in your PC that's driving you crazy and you don't know what it is. Um, so let's get started. Um, First thing you need to understand, first of all, is how to create a quiet PC. And you'll understand it a little bit later why that's important. If you understand the concept of uh, how to create a silent PC, you'll be able to identify where that noise is coming from. And so, one of the ways to do that is you have to isolate all the possibilities of where the noise can come from. So, typically, the noise can come from really, there are several components. Uh, Obviously, one of them would be the graphics card. Another component would be the power supply. Another component would be obviously the CPU cooler and the I/O, and any case fans. And all it takes is just one bad case fan that's gonna mess up your whole um, quiet PC. So that's why that's important. And also why it's important is because you may want to play video games at night and you don't want to let anybody know. If you're watching a video, you want to watch in complete silence. You don't want to be distracted by the PC making so much noise. So what you want to do is you want to get, it's a whole ecosystem, and so you want to make sure that you want to get the coolest parts. And what I mean by that, a little bit on that a little later. But if you get the coolest parts, it's an ecosystem. So, for example, your graphics card, you want it to fit in the biggest graphics card you can in your mini ITX computer, because the bigger the cooler, like this is a 3 slot card 2080 Ti, it means that there's a passive cooling. Well, most graphics cards today have a passive cooling where if it is below 50 degrees, the fan doesn't come on. As you can see right now, the EVGA fans are not on. Sometimes the way it's engineered is it just has one fan, sometimes two fans out of the three will just come on. It's just the way that it's built. There's nothing wrong with it. And then when it's under load, all three fans will then kick in. It's just the way it's created to keep the graphics card completely cool. So don't go crazy if you have a 2080 Ti and all your fans are not kicking at the same time. It's just the way it's engineered. And okay, now so when your graphics card is cool, all the other components within the ecosystem will be cooler. So, for example, your motherboard would be cooler, your power supply would be cooler, because the heat is not being transferred to the other components, creating it for it to shift up the fans, right? So that's important. So you want to get the biggest graphics card and you can, and then you'll see that your computer will be a lot quieter. Continuing on why how to create quiet PC. I have a 240 AIO here and I'm using Be Quiet fans. And Be Quiet fans, obviously, they're like 15 dBA. So even at 1000 or 1300 RPM max, it's still very quiet. You can't really hear it. It's not even audible. So you want to pick the most quietest fans you can for your case fans. And just make it, all your case fans should be the quietest, like 15, anything below 20 dBA is good. For AIOs, the pump could also be loud, but again, if you put that in a pump fan header, you can control that. It's not that bad. But the key thing is, like, if you get the quietest fans, Be Quiet or Noctua fans in your AIO or in your air cooler, when it revs up to like shh, like to the maximum, or when the PC turns on, you're gonna hear this crazy loud noise. But that's gonna be non-existent with really loud fans, because even if 1300 RPMs, this is going like 1000 right now, but even at 1300 RPMs, it's actually very quiet. You can't even hear it, right? So um, another thing you want to ensure is you want to get like, to be honest, you want to get the cheapest, best motherboard you can get. Meaning you want to go with an X570 or you know a Z690, etc., etc. Why that's important? Because the motherboard will have a better heat sinks and will also keep the CPU a lot cooler versus a non, which versus like an A board or a B board. So that's something to be aware of. So in summary, if you want to create a quiet PC, just make sure all your components within the computer is quiet. So fans, case fans, graphics cards. Just make sure you pick the quietest components you can get, and then that will cool everything else in the system, in the ecosystem, because the other parts are not shifting hot air inside the system. And then this another important thing when you're putting your PC together, make sure there's no airflow that's fighting against each other. So if you take a look at this PC, for example, this is the graphics card is intake here. This is also intake. So the air is going into the system. And then you'll see the back, the PSU that's in the back. That's also intake. And so the power supply is also important to make sure it's not fighting against each other. So if you have like intake this way, like a fan that's intake, and then the back fans, rear fans are like exhaust, for example, you may be actually fighting against air. So meaning if you have two fans, the direction that the fans are facing, they should all be going through this at the same direction. So if the fan is pulling air or taking out air in opposite directions, they will be fighting with each other, and it's going to create a frictional noise. So on a high load, the fans will actually be fighting against each other, like air going in and air going out. It's actually fighting against each other. So you want to make the airflow flow through the system in one direction. So that's actually also better for airflow, because when in a high loads, the fans are working with each other. So for example, if this is intake, you want your power supplies also be intake, and which is my power supply is also the situation. But if you had some rear fans here, you want to also make sure that's exhaust, right? So intake and then exhaust would just pull all the air going out this direction. So it goes in and then it goes out. So you never want to have like intake this way, for example, and then intake this way, because then they're actually going to be fighting against each other, and it's going to cause air friction. So that's number two. So how do you get rid of all that, like the noisy, if your PC is making this crazy noise and you just don't know what the problem is, and it's making you crazy, you want to be able to isolate each component. So if it's your graphics card, and your graphics card is obviously not spinning right now, so that noise can't be your graphics card. But if it is your graphics card, then obviously you want to change that or get that fixed. The next thing you want to look at is the CPU cooler fans. These are be quiet. So what you could do is you can also like just even turn off the fans. And right now I'm not hearing, the noise is not coming from them. So you want to isolate each possibility, and then you'll be able to get to your conclusion of what component is. But most of the time, believe it or not, the problem that I've discovered that's creating the noise, a couple of things. First thing, it could be your power supply. So if your power supply, try to get a semi-passive or even a fanless if your PC can actually have that airflow, can afford it. Meaning if it's a mini ITX, you probably don't want to get a fanless power supply because it probably will create a lot of heat. But you want to at least get a semi-passive. So what this one, for example, a Thermaltake, it actually only kicks up when it's like above 50 degrees. So in other words, if you get a power supply that doesn't have a semi-passive fan and it's always on, and it's like Next, for example, doesn't create really good power supplies because the fan is always on, then that's where the noises actually could be coming from. So over a longer period of time, if your fan within the power supply is no longer good, it could start creating some noise. So it could be your power supply. So by isolating each of the items, you can figure out what the problem is. But just be mindful that a lot of times can be just one component, and then it's causing the noise in your PC. So Make sure you invest in a power supply that at least has a semi-passive, and it only comes on when it's hot. Okay, so that's another possibility. Another possibility, believe it or not, it could be your motherboard. Like, how can it be your motherboard? Well, a lot of motherboards like X570 has actually a mini fan built in. This Z690 actually has a fan built inside the motherboard, and that's like for the VRM, and that only kicks up. You can control that on the BIOS, but sometimes the point is that that could also be the problem. That one little fan within the motherboard can cause the problem. So when you're buying the motherboard, you probably don't want to buy a motherboard with a fan built in. There is like X570 IS or SI, I believe, which took away the X570 fan. But that little fan, if it starts getting malfunctioned, it can create like a lot of noise. So that could also be the problem. So once you isolate all the items, or when you're building a quiet PC, you want to make sure that all the components that you're getting are as quiet as possible. And then that's how you can create a really quiet PC. Even under load, some games, this EVGA 2080 Ti, for example, the fans don't even come on. Sometimes only just one fan comes on. So it's really efficient. So One other thing I'm gonna say is I find that the best graphics cards that are the quietest and is actually Asus cards, especially the Strix or the tough cards. They're the best cards. So that's why they're more expensive. And in my opinion, I believe it's if you don't like noise and you wanna invest in a good graphics card, I would get an Asus card. In general, they're really good cards. So in conclusion, if your PC is making crazy noise and you want to get rid of it, you want to isolate each item in your PC to figure out what the problem is. Again, it could be coming from the motherboard, uh, with the mini fan that's built into the I/O, for example. It could be your power supply, so you want to get at least a semi-passive. You can also get a fanless power supply. It could be your graphics card, it could be your cooler, it could be your case fans. And so if you isolate each item, you'll be able to identify what the problem is. So I hope this video helps. Put your comments below if this actually helped you figure out what your noise problem was. But a lot of people don't know that the problem could come from the motherboard, it can come from the power supply. A lot of times they think it's just the case fans and the graphics card and the cooler. That's not always the case, right? It could be the power supply that is just one component in the entire PC could be the problem. So you just once you isolate each item, you can then just replace that one item, and then you'll be able to have a quiet PC. And then just remember that the airflow, always try to have the airflow to not fight against each other. Should always be one direction. So like I mentioned earlier, the AIO fans are coming this way. Even my power supply is actually an intake and it's exhausting up from the back there. And then you notice that if the airflows are not fighting against each other within the system, it's like you don't want air going in this way and then air going this way. So now they're like kind of fighting against each other for flow. Uh, like you get the point, right? You don't want to create any air friction noise because that can also be a possibility on high load. Thanks for watching. See you in my next video.